And we are live. Cool. As I say, I think every webinar that I do, I have to say this line, but I always get a little bit scared when you start the webinar and you're like, are the numbers going to go up? Because if they don't, I've done something wrong and I don't know how to fix it. So I'm glad
sent the wrong link out. That literally happened with an event I was at yesterday, Darren. They sent an invite out with 2 links on,
yeah,
2 Zoom links. So yeah, and then everyone joined the wrong one. So they were sitting
and
there
you just
waiting.
sat there awkwardly, like, oh, okay, is it just me? Okay.
Sat waiting for people to be let in, and it was the wrong link, so we had to do it all again.
Awkward. I'm seeing hands getting raised right at the start, so I'm going to chuck this statement out here nice and early. So we won't be stopping the session to ask questions vocally, but if you use the Q&A functionality, the Tesco's team will be going through their presentations. So what will happen is at the end, I'll then collate all of this, all of the Q&As, and then ask them back to the team. If you want to talk between the attendees during the session, what you need to do is just change your chat to panelists and attendees, and then you can all talk together, and then everyone can see each other's questions. I think we've surprisingly, compared to what you had yesterday, Nathan, we've managed to get everyone in very, very early. So I'm going to hand over to you at this point.
Cool, thanks, Darren. So I'll pop the slides on quickly. Okay, so yeah. Hi everyone, and yeah, great to see so many people so quickly as well. Bang on time, even at lunchtime. So yeah, my name's Nathan Luxford. I'm head of cloud platforms for Tesco's, and you've got me as the introduction or the warm-up act to the great speakers you got from our engineering community and Jamie and Rohit. So I just want to talk about the platforms and technologies that underpin Jamie and Rohit and what they discuss about how we actually build our retail platform, our omni-channel capabilities to serve our customers, and those underpinning infrastructure and cloud technologies that we need to actually make that happen. So I just want to set some sort of stats and sort of key who Tesco's are. Obviously, I think for this audience, probably everyone knows who Tesco are, but I wanted to get people to understand the scale. So just to think about that, as a group, we have around 53 billion pounds of sales last year, and that's a massive number. And to underpin that, to make that a success, is all underpinned by technology. So in technology alone, we transact around 1 billion store product order calculations per day. We schedule 272 million miles of lorry journeys a day. So that's underpinned by technology. That underpins our commitments to the environment, keeping costs down as well. So the better we schedule each of those miles, the less CO2 we do, the less cost. And that's obviously a massive number. We plan and sort of schedule and the planograms and getting those products on the shelf. We plan that across 112 million square feet, and that's just an enormous number. And this, again, the scale. So some more sort of traditional IT use cases. We have 26,000 head office users, and we have 22,000 PCs for our store colleagues to use. We have 52,500 checkouts, main bank checkouts, 16,000 self-service checkouts. And in our, across our on-prem to edge story, we have around 50,000 VMs from the edge to the data center. In the cloud, we sit around 9,000 traditional VMs in the cloud as well. So generally, that's a lot of technology out and across our estate. And this stat sort of boggled my mind. We have an average 1,200 grocery orders every minute. So even during the we've clocked over 5,000 orders since we've been having this discussion, and since we kicked off with Darren and you guys in this meeting. And another great fact here is we're the largest dedicated grocery home shopping platform in the world. So lots of platforms do more than just grocery, but as a dedicated platform, we are the biggest in the world. And just as some sort of scene setting here again, COVID, as everyone talks about COVID in the last year, and our response to it. Technology and our agility was ability to scale up from where we were around 600,000 delivery slots a week to then scaling it and over doubling over the last year in response to feeding the nation. So Tesco's accounts for about a third of the market share. So about a third of the country is fed by Tesco's. And to obviously raise that challenge and mission over the last year, we've scaled up to 1.5 million slots. And that's down to the underpinning technology that Jamie and Rohit will go through this as we go through this discussion. Trading patterns significantly change, a real change from being a focus on in-person shopping and to really a digital shopping experience. Also, we had other challenges across the business and technology, things like moving those 26,000 workers from being in our campuses in Welling or our distribution centers or regional offices in London or even in Bangalore or in Central Europe and Czech Republic and Republic of Ireland. We've had to move all those 26,000 users as well to remote working through Teams, other technologies. So I've stolen a stat from Jamie's team and Jamie's boss here about, the identity API, which Jamie will go through it. So we saw in response to the Clap for Carers last year. So this was about a year ago now. So I remember when that started. It was amazing community effort. And even we saw through our technology and our APIs, the user counts drop off at 8 p.m, which was fantastic to see. It's the only time we didn't want people to be on our website, logging in and spending money. We wanted everyone to appreciate the NHS. So that was great to see. And on the right-hand side, we were hitting, so these are hits per second. That's why I didn't get my head around. When I first saw this graph, I thought, 200, that's a really small number. But then I got to see that, across our CDN network, we were getting in excess 220 hits per second to Tesco.com, which was just, again, an amazing, crazy number that, we didn't see before in response to the pandemic. So lots of scale at Tesco, lots of problems that we need to solve. But what tools do we need to do it? So of course we leverage the best of breed public hyperscalers across AWS and Azure, and a true multi-cloud strategy in Tesco's. And when we underpin our data center and edge transitions and stories, that VMware and their Tanzu product line. So this again allows us to partner with these leading technology providers to give our engineers the best of breed on both the public cloud and then from the data center to the edge. And of course, we also underpin many different SaaS offerings. And again, we utilize them whenever possible. A lot of what we need to do now is we've moved away from traditional architectures now to Agile, to CI/CD, and to really underpin that, we have used GitHub for our code repository, and we have a very strong partnership with GitHub. Great technology and innovations coming out from them guys. We run around 263 organizations across GitHub, underpinning 18,000 code repositories underneath that. So that shows you how long we've been doing code repository checking in, and that's a lot of code there and a lot of technology that these guys, Jamie and Rohit and their teams and other people in Tesco Technology are checking in that code all the time. We use Nexus as well as a secure repository. We underpin that for a lot of our binary artifacts. We run around 350 binary repositories in Nexus. That supports updates, repos, and so forth as well. We use Chef across primarily in our data center and our edge. So we manage around 10,000 servers, primarily our store servers and on-prem in regards to Chef. So that's delivering desired state and config management and helps us, automate and take out the manual steps in managing that large edge estate. So moving on to some more of the next, we're also now using infrastructure as code to underpin all those CI/CD pipelines. So primarily we're now transitioning to keep it cloud agnostic, reusable using HashiCorp Terraform. Then we also then utilize Kubernetes heavily across our platforms. So a lot of what Jamie and Rohit will do if they're using containers and orchestrating that will be primarily driven by Kubernetes. We've been a long-term user of Kubernetes, probably well over 5 years. We started with our inbuilt version of Kubernetes before we could get things like EKS or AKS. And then we also leverage a lot of AKS across our estate. And we've partnered very strongly with Microsoft to deliver AKS at a production-ready size. So things like Tesco.com, the landing pages there are now all transitioning to AKS-driven runtimes. And this funky logo on the right-hand side, which is one I found. I've been trying to find something this is inner sourcing. So it's going to be the cyclone of inner sourcing. So I love that Jamie laughed at that one. But yeah, So this is what we're trying to drive. We've got currently 25 plus production teams now working together, and we're trying to build that in an open source light community, our inner source community, to drive more Terraform modules, trying to create repeatable patterns, really then drive community owners of what we do well at Tesco's and drive that to be reused across our teams. So we've got over 17 active internal projects in our inner sourcing community, and that's driving lots of great reuse, great new reusable stories. And again, hopefully when we mature these products to a state, we want to also try and give those back to the open source community. We've got a couple of bits already in our open source repo on GitHub. Tesco does give out some of the code that's used in things like Aqueduct, which is a decentralized messaging concept. And again, we want to then drive these 17 active projects to more maturity and hopefully then also give it back to the community. So I don't know, we're doing Q&A at the end, are we, Darren? Or do we want to do ad hoc Q&A, or should I let Jamie go next?
We'll let Jamie take over. We'll do Q&A at the end. We'll collate it all at the end.
Right, thank you very much.
Cool. All right, awesome. Thank you, Nathan. Appreciate it. It's a great introduction, hopefully, to who Tesco is, some of the context and some of the scale there, some really interesting numbers. Let me just share my screen quickly. There we go. Cool. All right, awesome. Hopefully you can see my slides now. So just start with a quick introduction to myself. So I'm Jamie, obviously. I'm the head of software development for identity at Tesco. I've been at Tesco now for around 8 years or so. I joined actually originally on the graduate scheme, and I've worked in a number of different parts of the Tesco organization over that time, but most recently have taken over the engineering teams that build the identity service, which is one of our enterprise APIs at Tesco. We essentially are the team that's responsible for everything around authentication at Tesco, be that customers authenticating, colleagues, suppliers, machine-to-machine authentication or service authentication. We power all of those journeys. So whether that be a customer logging in online with a username and password, customer going to a store with a club card and authenticating at a till, a colleague scanning their badge in a PDA, or as I said, sort of service authentication, one system talking to another. We have APIs that deliver all of those different things. And I guess for us, the challenge is all about scale and resilience and high availability. We do something on the order of about 1 billion API calls a week through the identity service. So there's plenty of traffic there, and there's plenty to keep us busy. And obviously all of that is built on the platform that Nathan has just helpfully described. We use microservice-based model deployed on the Kubernetes clusters Nathan just talked about, and the teams come together to build and manage those services. So that's a very brief introduction to who I am and what identity is. But actually today, what I've been asked to talk about is more about kind of how we work as a software engineer organization within Tesco. What are some of the principles that we subscribe to when it comes to organization design? How do we structure ourselves to deliver and manage software at that kind of scale? So more about kind of the ways of working than it is about the technology. And then Rohit will talk more about architecture afterwards. I guess just a couple of caveats before I get started. I'm obviously going to talk specifically about the ways of working within identity at Tesco, which hopefully will be a fairly representative example of how other teams do it. But we are big believers in kind of the principle of team autonomy and the idea that every team has the ability to decide what's the right structure for them and how they want to organize themselves. And so therefore, what I say will hopefully be a good example, but it won't necessarily be exactly representative of what everyone else does. And the other caveat is that we, in the same way that we are iterative in the way that we build software, we are also iterative in the way that we organize ourselves. And we're strong believers that we should always be kind of constantly challenging ourselves and thinking about what the right way to structure teams is and to organize work. So this is, I guess, the least bad way we've found so far for organizing teams, but I'm sure it will continue to evolve going into the future. So having said all that, I'm going to talk you through just a few of the principles that we follow when we organize ourselves and when we design teams. And then I'll talk through kind of practically what does that mean and what impact does that have on our day-to-day lives. So as a starting point, this is kind of the central tenet that we base everything around, which is the concept of software development around products rather than projects. You may have heard this before, kind of product-driven development, and there's loads of great resources online that talk in great detail about what that means. There's In particular, there's a post on Martin Fowler's website that I would recommend. But at kind of a high level, what that means is transitioning away from a more traditional style of IT development where everything is based around projects, where you organize yourselves around kind of a short-lived team structure to deliver a specific set of features or a specific set of functionality, into a world where teams are much longer lived and teams own the end-to-end life cycle of a product. And typically that means rather than caring about delivering a specific feature that has been requested by the business team, instead teams are organized around KPIs or customer journeys that we want to build. And that team is then given the product remit to take that KPI and figure out what do we need to build from a technology perspective in order to deliver against it. So the emphasis changes from 6 months of time, deliver this feature, to a kind of ongoing cycle of here is a KPI, how can we improve that KPI and make progress against it? And obviously this concept of product-driven development meshes very neatly with Agile software development because it encourages that adaptive, iterative development cycle and moves us away from a world where we have to plan projects up front and figure out what we're going to be doing for the next few months. So that's kind of the starting point. And within Identity and most teams within Tesco, we subscribe to being product-driven. And in my team specifically, we think of Identity as a product. It is not a project. It is a set of different services that comprise the Identity product. And we have kind of 6 key KPIs that we track ourselves against to define how successful we are in delivering that. I guess there are a couple of things that fall out of that, but the most obvious one is this principle of you build it, you run it. And again, this is probably something you'll have heard. DevOps is obviously a big trend in the industry at the moment. But very naturally, if you have a longer lived team that is building and owning a product, it also makes sense that that team owns and supports that product. We always say that the best people to run and maintain a piece of software in production are the team that have built it, for a number of reasons, partly just because they're the most experienced and have the most knowledge in that piece of software, but also perhaps more critically because it drives the right incentives and the right behaviors. You know, in the kind of traditional IT model, you have a team that builds something and then they throw it over the fence and someone else picks it up and owns the support of it. But in reality, then you have a disconnect between a team that is incentivized to deliver features versus another team that then has to live with the pain of maintaining that thing for real. So if you join those two concerns together, you drive the right kind of behaviors around software quality, measuring quality, testing, etc., all the way through the development process. Because it means if the team gets it right, they get the benefits and get to enjoy supporting that great piece of software. And when they get it wrong, they get fast feedback on what that looks like and an opportunity to course correct there. So we subscribe to that you build it, you run it. We own the product and we support that product end to end throughout its whole life cycle. And then another principle that we like to subscribe to is this concept of 2 pizza-sized teams, which again, hopefully you might have heard about. It's popularized by Amazon a number of years back, but I think is really powerful. And it's a very simple principle. It's just around what is the ideal size of a team to build a piece of software? And the answer from Amazon is that the ideal size of team is a team that can be fed by 2 pizzas. So roughly speaking, that gives you an upper bound of kind of 6-7 people, the number of people you could put in a room and give them 2 pizzas and they would be happy and there'd be no moaning about a lack of food. And the reason for that is all about collaboration, right? Collaboration is really, really important when we're building software. We don't build software as individuals, we build software as teams. And we do that because we have a diverse set of experiences and backgrounds, and we put all of those together into a melting pot to build a software product. But in order for that to be effective, the team has to collaborate and communicate with each other. But what you discover is that collaboration and communication really does not scale linearly with team size. The more people that are in a team, the more communication and collaboration overhead that you will have. And this chart shows that in what is hopefully a fairly intuitive way. But in a team of 3 people, obviously everybody only has to talk to one other person or to each other person, and therefore there are only 3 channels of communication. But as you scale that size of team, the number of possible channels of communication increases almost exponentially. Where with 6 people, which is a typical team size for us, that would give you sort of 15 channels of communication. But then as you start to extend beyond that, as you move to 12 or even more, up to like 50 members within one team, you get exponentially larger channels of communication. You spend more and more time and overhead on communicating, and also more and more context is lost. So for us, designing teams and thinking about how we work is all about sort of that trade-off between having a team that is large enough to be effective at building software and to have the right mix of skills within it, but small enough to make sure that we can be genuinely collaborative and we can have the right channels for communication in place there. So hopefully that makes sense as a sort of bit of background. Within identity as a whole, the wider product team is kind of 40-ish engineers in total. So obviously the question is, how do we deliver in that product-driven way that I've just described, but also keeping in mind these constraints around team size and trying to make teams that are of the right size to be effective? And the other really obvious thing to watch out for here, that the sort of the obvious downside of breaking yourselves up into too many small teams, is you run a real risk of building silos. And this is why I titled my talk, Building Products, Not Silos, because silos is something that we are always keeping a very careful eye on watching out for. When we talk about identity, identity is one logical domain, and we present ourselves externally to the rest of Tesco as kind of one simple API. But within identity, there's obviously a whole bunch of different microservices. There's something like 35 different microservices, and there's a lot of complex interdependency within there. And we're always very cognizant of trying to build up areas of specialism or areas of expertise within that team that then become single points of failure or become kind of a point of friction as we try and build that product out going forwards. We want the team to be the identity team and the team to have context on the whole product, be able to support the whole product, and understand the impacts on the ecosystem as we develop new things and push our product forwards. So we try and avoid creating pockets of expertise within the team that then naturally become silos. So my question is, given everything I've said, given that we want to have product-focused teams, we have 40 engineers, but we only want to have sort of 6 or 7 engineers in one team, and we want to avoid silos, what does an ideal team look like for us? And this is where we create what we call outcome-centered teams. An outcome-centered team is a team within the identity product ecosystem that lives for a shortest duration, typically 4, 5, 6 months, to deliver a specific outcome that is part of the identity product roadmap. And when I say outcome, what I mean by an outcome is a particular business objective that we want to achieve that is defined in terms of the what, but not the how. So a typical sort of example for us might be that we might say, well, one of the points of friction for customers is that authentication journeys are taking too long and we're losing customers through that process. So we would set ourselves an outcome of reducing the average time for successful authentication journeys by 50%. And we would create an outcome team to deliver against that objective. The how of how we deliver that objective is very much within the gift of the team. So everything from the kind of functionality they might want to deliver, to the technology that they might want to use, to even like the delivery methodology that they might want to pick, is all very much within the gift of the team. So within identity, we have a number of different outcome teams, and those outcome teams are all empowered to work in different ways. Some of our teams, they're all agile, but some of them are Scrum, some of them are Kanban, some of them are some combination of those two. And that's entirely within the gift of the team. We believe that the team is the most effective at determining what's right for them and what will work for their outcome. And the other critical part of an outcome team, as this chart sort of tries to illustrate, is that they contain all of the skills that they need to be effective at delivering the outcome within that one team. We believe in locating teams together, if not physically, at least within a digital togetherness, and containing all of the skill set that we need there. So for us, that typically means a team will consist of software engineers, product managers, program managers, potentially people like user experience designers as well, depending on whether that's relevant or not for the specific outcome. But we will put all of the skill set that we need, and then we will let that team get on with the task of delivering against the outcome. And as I say, that's a short-lived construct, right? So that team exists for the duration required to deliver the outcome. And then at the end of it, they will split up and they'll each go their own separate ways and join different outcome teams within the identity space. But critically, what they've created there is still contributed back to the identity product as a broader entity, and therefore support and maintenance and the operation of it becomes a concern for the whole team. And the wider team takes collective ownership of what each of the different outcome teams build. So that's how we approach the actual delivery of software within identity. But I guess the obvious biggest downside of that, and what we try very actively to mitigate against, is in a world where we live in sort of short-term development teams, each focused on a specific outcome and then splitting up to go their separate ways. What you can lose is that sort of longer-term view on career development and progression and those sort of longer-term relationships that help support you with that. And personal development is hugely important for us at Tesco. We want everyone who works here to have long and successful careers with the company. And therefore, we're very keen to support and progress people internally. I mean, I've been here 8 years and I started on the graduate scheme, so I like to think I'm quite a good example of that. But there are many, many people that have been at Tesco for a very long time. And obviously, career development is a huge part of delivering that. So we're very cognizant of the risks that a sort of short-term outcome-based model approach creates, which is why we almost end up with a matrix structure where you have a team who you are working with from an outcome perspective, but then you also have your support team around you that is a more permanent construct to help support you throughout your longer-term career at Tesco. And as part of that, you have a line manager who is focused not on sort of day-to-day task management, because they won't necessarily be working on the same thing as you. They won't necessarily be in the same outcome team as you, but their sort of sole focus is to help you with those personal development type conversations, making sure you have the right career plan in place, making sure that you have the right training, etc., and that you have the time and capacity to do that. We have this concept that you can see on the slide here called Kaizen time, which is the idea that everybody outside of their regular outcome work gets 10% of their total time to basically work on whatever is important to them, whether that be a little niggling feature that they've wanted to implement, whether that be some training they want to do, or a hackathon type project, whatever they want to do, everybody gets 10% of their time to use however they want to use it. And that provides sort of that guaranteed time and space to do those things. Actually, as it happens, Kaizen Day is once a sprint, and as it so happens, it is today. It's every other Thursday. So I'm very much looking straight after this to go and find out what everyone's been doing on their Kaizen days today. And then alongside that, obviously, that you get the supportive team and the buddying network from peers and engineers who, again, will be working on other outcomes outside of your immediate space, but can be there to help support you for that longer term progression. So that's really all I have time for, but hopefully that's just given you a bit of a flavor of what it's like to work with an engineering team at Tesco. As I say, that the specifics of it aren't exactly the same everywhere, but I think the core principles are, and that we have a product mindset, we believe in product-driven development, but that we work in smaller outcome-focused teams to avoid building those silos. We rotate people between those teams to broaden our experience, but we have that focus on the kind of permanent channels of communication to support people through their personal development and their career at Tesco. That is everything I have. Thank you for listening. I hope that was interesting. And yeah, I will take questions at the end and hand over to Rohit in the meantime.
Thank you very much, Jamie.
Thank you, Jamie. I will share my screen now. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
So thank you, Jamie, and thank you, Nathan. So everyone, hopefully you've been warmed up so by now by the excellent presentations from Nathan and Jamie, and it's time now to do a bit of a deep dive into some of our architecture and engineering, and that's what I'm going to be focusing on. But before that, my name is Rohit. I am head of software development at Tesco for the contact and profile teams. And contact profile are very similar to identity teams. We own a piece of Tesco domain, and we are responsible for we own all of the customer data for all of our millions and millions of customers, and we provide services for other teams to consume, which are based around that personal data that we hold for our customers. We're also responsible for all external communication, all transactional external communication to our customers. So that means all the emails, transactional push notifications, transactional text messages, all of that, snail mail, club card, all of that communication happens to our customers via the systems and processes built by my teams. Today, in the next 15 minutes, we'll do a very fast and very high-level deep dive into the architecture of the system that delivers these transactional customer communications at scale. So transactional communications are kind of different from email, from marketing communications, as in a customer is expecting these emails based upon, or these communications, whether emails or text messages or push notifications, based on some transaction or some interaction they have had with our platform. So just to give you a bit of an idea of the scale of those communications, we deliver upwards of about 10 million a day. And these are a mix of transactional emails, text messages, push notifications, snail mails, club cards. And so the scale of this is obviously, you can see, quite huge. And just to give an example, what are the transactional messages we send? We send order confirmation emails when somebody places an order with our with our platform. We'll send them in order confirmation, order amend. We'll get a password reset emails. You'll send the one-time passcodes via SMS. We'll send you push notifications like your vouchers are ready. These are just about 500 probably messages that we send to our customers. Just to give a flavor of what's involved in each customer, I'll just give you a peek into an order that my wife placed some time back, and this is the order confirmation email from that order. So you can see, just to give you an idea of what's involved in producing an email like that. You have the personal details around, and some of the details around the order, and around the address, my phone number, so personal details here, then a quick summary, and then the whole basket of what we prepared, what kind of coupons or vouchers were applicable. All of that detail is in there. Then a summary, and then the payment details will also get added here. So these are quite involved pieces of communication. You can say that each one of these is almost like a single page application, as in it's like you're rendering a template, and then you're calling a bunch of APIs to help you render the bits in the templates. So these are quite involved.
I don't think it was showed, Rohit. I don't think it came up on the screen.
Sorry?
I don't think your email came up on the screen when you clicked the link.
Okay. Technical glitches. Let's pretend it was a huge email, a big email. It had all healthy foods. There was nothing unhealthy in it. It was all and it literally had about 100 or 200 items in the basket. So it was quite. It's, as I mentioned, it's quite. It's almost like, it reminds me very similar to building or rendering single page applications. Some of these communications are very similar to that. But before we, so delivering 10 million emails every day is quite a task. But before we decide to, in any, and this is true of everywhere in Tesco, the engineering and the architecture is essentially derived from the company culture. That what derives, what engineering we have, what architecture we have, what SLOs, they're all derived from the company culture. And the company culture in Tesco, other than every little helps, is every communication for every customer we will deliver, we'll endeavor to deliver every single. We might have millions and millions of customers. We might be doing, as Nathan said, 1,200 orders a minute. But communication around each of these orders for every single customer, we want to deliver every one of them. Each one is important as anybody else. And we'll respond in real time to customer queries around the questions they might have around the comm. So you call our call center, and you have a query around an order confirmation email or a push notification that you've received from us. Our colleagues at the call center will have the tools to answer your specific query amongst the 50 or 60 odd million customers that we have. So this is the company culture, which kind of then derives from there. We derive the service level objectives for the team and for the journey. And the service level objectives that we have are essentially, in this space, are 5 nines. I think most engineers will understand what that is. The latency, the 99th percentile latency, will usually be within 2 seconds. And the traceability is that 99% of queries, we will answer them in real time. So that when you call the call center, we will have enough information to give you a qualitative answer about your query, not just raise a ticket to some other team and then say that we'll get back in touch with you. No, we will communicate with you and give you the right information when you call us. So you can see when we have this amazing culture and these really challenging SLOs are derived from that, the engineering has to be fun and challenging and effective. So this is the high level conceptual architecture of how we deliver these communications. And I'll in the next 10 minutes, I will do a bit of a deep dive into each of these components. But broadly, the whole communication platform can be divided into something called a message bridge. And then there are the enrichers, and then there's the hyperdrive. I love the term hyperdrive. We call it the hyperdrive because it's the core, it's the heart, beating heart of the system. So the message bridge is essentially in Tesco, as you probably gathered by now, most teams are kind of are centered or own a piece of Tesco domain, the classic bounded context. So every team owns a bounded context, and as part of their they publish events. So every team will publish events which are related to their bounded context, to their domain, and other teams can subscribe to that event. So in the message bridge, we are essentially subscribing to the enterprise events, and we are converting those events into our internal domain events. So that's the job of the message bridge. Subscribe to the events that we're interested in, the enterprise events, and convert them into our domain events. Then we have the enrichers. The enrichers are responsible, and this is where the distributed architecture, which I'll touch upon in a bit, is that every journey will have its own enricher, and there's a reason for that. But the enricher's sole job is to basically subscribe to these messages, get these messages that have been published, these domain messages that we have now got from the message bridge, and enrich them with all the detail from all the APIs that we need. So I mentioned earlier that an order confirmation email will contain all of the basket API and the order information. That information comes from the order API. It contains all of the relevant personal details that we need to share with you. That comes with the profile API. So different journeys and different enrichers will require to talk to different APIs. And each enricher for each journey, there will be an order confirm enricher, there will be an SMSOTP enricher, there will be an order amend enricher. They will talk to the relevant dependencies and enrich the event with all the information needed to publish that information to the client. Until this point, every message is a piece of JSON, nothing else. Where it gets transformed from JSON to, say, HTML that you can view in amazing Gmail is in the hyperdrive. So the hyperdrive is at the core of the system, because every journey will need to use the hyperdrive to communicate. And the function of the hyperdrive is essentially twofold. One is to map the template required for the message to the template. So get the HTML template and map this JSON to that template and enrich that template with the information in the that is in the JSON that comes from the enrichers. So basically mapping the template to the messages or the JSON that's coming out is the primary job of the hyperdrive. Then the next job of the hyperdrive is to basically send that message to, if it's an email, we use Amazon's SES, AWS SES to send that email. If it is an SMS, it will send it to SNS, which is Amazon's SNS service to send SMS. And if it is a push notification, then we will use Azure's push notification service to send that. So the hyperdrive's responsibility is to essentially map the message to the template and then send it across to you. So these are the high level kind of bits, the message bridge, the enricher, and the hyperdrive, and we'll do a bit of a deep dive into each of them. So as I mentioned earlier, the message bridge gets the enterprise events and then maps them to our own domain events. And each message bridge is essentially, it's a Kafka listener, which is hosted in AWS Fargate. We use serverless quite extensively here. And this scale, so as if we get more, so one of the messages we subscribe to is order paid event, and that actually results into an order confirmed email event. So whenever some other team tells us that an order has been paid for, we want to send you an order confirmation email, and that mapping happens in the message bridge. And so the message bridge, from a scalability point of view, Fargate is amazing. We have basically, what we've done here is a bit nifty. What we have said is that it will scale based upon the time it takes us to transfer these events into SNS. If we feel that the time it is taking us to transfer these events in here is beyond a threshold, Fargate scales out, because that's our hint for us that we are receiving more traffic than our current configuration in Fargate, AWS Fargate can handle, so we scale. So that's our scalability pattern there. And it scales seamlessly behind the scenes. When the traffic increases, it scales out. When the traffic decreases, it scales back in. Automatically, we have to do nothing there. All the heavy lifting is done by AWS. So that's the message bridge. And then we call the enrichers. The enrichers are at the heart of the distributed system that we have built here. And this is the heart of the highly available and the fault tolerant system. Every journey gets its own enricher. So if an order or confirmation email will have its own enricher, SMS OTP will have its own enricher. And the reason building it like this is, let's say that you did a bad release with order confirmation email, right? Bad releases happen in Tesco. We release, in my teams, we will release at least 5 or 6 times a day, probably more. It is, or if somebody tells me that at that scale, you will never ever do a bad release, then you're either lying or you're not doing it right. Bad releases are part of doing things right, in my view. You will have from time to time bad releases in the system. Now, the aim of having a distributed system like this is that a bad release in the order confirmation email journey does not affect the SMS OTP journey. These are highly independent of each other, distributed systems. So if that is the aim of having an enricher, which is unique for each journey. And we have dozens and dozens and dozens of enrichers built like this. And each enricher is essentially, this is the SNS topic. It subscribes to the topic. It pushes it to a queue. There's a Lambda which enriches the message. In the happy path, then it will send it to the hyperdrive. In the unhappy path, there are things happen which I will describe in a moment. But this is basically this architecture of having a queue subscribe to a topic, and then a Lambda which processes it, enriches it, sends it to the hyperdrive. That pattern exists in every enricher. And you can see that some, like the order confirmation enricher, calls many dependent APIs. This calls only one. So that's where the next step is, how are we kind of taking our high availability and fault tolerance to the next level using this architecture? And that's where the concept of self-healing systems comes into the picture. So for every enricher has this concept of self-healing built into it. So I mentioned in the happy part, basically the Lambda, the processing Lambda, is able to communicate and get all the information from the proxy or from the dependencies it needs to, and then sends the message to the hyperdrive. What if your proxy is down, right? Blips happen. There, it is to be expected that your dependencies will have issues. What happens in that scenario is we have implemented what we call an exponential back-off retry. So the order confirmation, this Lambda, let's say that the order API or the club card API was failing. Now, broadly, how the self-healing system works is this Lambda will try to call that API synchronously 3 times. Broadly, in some cases might be less, might be wrong, but just might be longer, depends on the journey. But broadly, it will try to maximize the probability of trying to communicate to that API. If it fails, it sends it to the DL queue, the dead letter queue. And that is when the exponential back-off Lambda takes over. The idea of the exponential back-off Lambda is to kind of, using the exponential back-off algorithm, it will try to replay these messages, but at a rate which does not cripple an already crippled API which might be having problems. So what it will do is, using the exponential back-off algorithm, it will slowly try to requeue the messages back. Now, in the happy part, it requeues the message. The blip has fixed itself. Happy days. It goes back to, it can succeed. But if, let's say, the blip is quite long-lived and it can't be solved, then the messages end up in the failed queue. And at that point, human intervention is required. And that's where our DevOps culture that Jamie mentioned in his email earlier, that every team will have engineers on call to support their services. So when something ends up in the order confirmation in the failed queue in any enricher, that is a signal to the system that the system can't self-heal. And at that point, potentially, depending on the message, and human intervention might be required. And that's when we trigger an alert to the DevOps support engineer. And the aim of so then that person is woken from her or his sleep. And they have only one aim in mind, is to form a view of, can these messages still be salvaged? If yes, help nurse the dependencies back to health. And once they do that, we have automation we have recently migrated that to Azure DevOps, which allows you to re-queue these messages back into the inbound queue. But because this time the dependency is fixed, the messages flow through. So this is like the heart of either the self-healing or sometimes a bit of a manual healing we have to do to ensure that we, again, from the company culture, we try our best to not lose even a single message. And this architecture is at the heart of that. And then finally, there is the hyperdrive, which I said is the beating heart of the system. When a message is sent to the hyperdrive from here, it basically, hyperdrive's job is to get the right template, the HTML template or the text template, whatever template is needed, and then map the enriched message that we have in JSON to that template, get the email ID or the SMS ID or the push ID for that client, and then just send you the message. That's the hyperdrive. The hyperdrive is needed for all the messages that we get in, because it satisfies the concern of mapping the template to the message and sending the message across. So that's why it is the beating heart of the system. So these are the three, the message bridge, the enrichers, and the hyperdrive. And you can see this is, I would love to go into a bit more detail, but even here, fault tolerance is built into the heart of the system. It is supposed to be highly available, highly scalable fault tolerant system. Just a bit on scalability, right? How do we scale a Tesco scale? How do we handle that? That must be huge, big problem to solve, right? No, not with serverless, honestly, not with AWS serverless. It's their problem. They are not much smarter than us, but slightly more experienced in handling these kind of serverless issues in scalability and managing platforms than we are. So using serverless, SNS, SQS have always scaled automatically for us at load. We have never had to do anything. Lambdas also scale automatically, but there are some caveats because every account only gets about, by default, 1,000 maximum Lambda invocations, but you can increase it. We have increased it to about 20,000 invocations. But even there, you have to have some patterns around how do you ensure that one Lambda does not basically take over all of the max invocations. And we have some, not the scope here, but we have patterns implemented, which ensures that one rogue Lambda does not bring down your whole system, your whole architecture. But that's an interesting kind of a conversation in itself. And just to give you an example, some recent spikes we have, when Prime Minister Boris Johnson announced his first and second lockdowns, there was a huge spike on our e-commerce platform, and broadly that resulted in, within 5 minutes, we saw a 10 times increase in people doing password reset journeys, 5 times normal new registrations as people started trying to get accounts with us so that they could place online orders. Grocery traffic can go up from, there are certain set events we run, it can go from 5 minutes to 5 times to 20 times traffic in 10 minutes. And we had to deal with these spikes, and this architecture kind of allows us to deal with it. And finally, a bit about the traceability. I mentioned right at the start that if you're a customer and you call our call center and say, I was expecting that order confirmation email or that password reset email, I haven't received it. Can you help me, please? And then we have a system, again, a distributed, scalable, based on serverless technologies. And the heart of the system is the history API. So the customer engagement center or the call center, they have an API, they have a user interface or UX or UI that interacts with the history API. And the history API has all of the events related to your or all of the relevant events related to your email or your push notification, which will allow a customer engagement call center person or colleague to answer your queries. So we are able to answer queries like, actually, we did try to send you this email, but your mailbox was full. Or your provider decided that your phone number is spam, so it's not going to send it to you. So that kind of insight comes from the events that AWS generate from us. We populate that in the history API, and then our colleagues in the customer engagement center are able to answer your questions in real time. So hopefully this has been a useful but very fast kind of a overview of how we deliver customer transaction communications at scale at Tesco. And the scale is probably, I'm pretty sure that the scale is the outside of the US probably is there's no other company in the UK which deals with the kind of scale that we have to do. The only other companies in the world that probably come to mind are the Apples and the Googles and the Amazons of the world. But from a pure scalability and the challenges we face in scalability, we are quite close, if not there. And that's about it. Thank you.
Amazing. So talking about no messages being missed, I think Jamie's hands, if we looked at them, are probably on fire right now.
Doing my best to keep up. Lots of great questions.
Oh yeah, it's amazing.
It's going to be the shame, Darren. But yeah.
I was going to say, I kept seeing me typing, and I was like, I don't know what I can add here, but incredible work to have got through. I think you're at 16 questions so far, so living by the mantra, clearly. So we've got about 8 minutes left, so I'm going to start on a softer question that probably everyone's wondering, and then we'll move into some of the meaty ones for the final 5 minutes or so. Question that I've seen come up in the chat a few times. What's your favourite thing about working at Tesco? So I'll let each of you answer individually. Should we start with you, Jamie, as you've answered most questions anyway?
Yeah, absolutely, I can do. So obviously I talked a lot about the culture and things in my presentation, so I won't cover that again, but the culture is definitely a reason. For me, I think it's really about the scale and the breadth of what we do, right? I think everybody thinks of Tesco as a food retailer, which we are, but we're much, much more than that. Hopefully you got a sense of that over the course of all of these presentations. We have food shops, but we also run one of the largest e-commerce businesses in the world. We have a world-leading supply chain. We have Tesco Bank. We have Tesco Mobile. And therefore, the opportunities for breadth in your career and a chance to experience lots of different things is almost unparalleled. And as Rohit has intimated, the scale side of things there introduces some really interesting engineering challenges as well. So breadth and scale for me. Amazing.
Nathan, if we go to you next.
Yeah, so I have the challenge of going after Jamie. Yeah, so agree with all of that. But the other big benefit I've enjoyed since joining Tesco, as well as being able to actually been working in telecoms and edutech and other verticals before that. I could never actually have a tangible way of touching my product outside of either in the virtual world or as a back-end service. So the fact I can go to a Tesco shop, see colleagues interacting with technologies we've deployed, actually seeing the use cases in reality at scale, and also having to be able to speak to your friends and families, go, oh yeah, I worked on this really cool thing about the Tesco till, and you'll see it soon. Like when you see the new self-service checkout, my team helped do this underpinning technology 3 layers down, but it's really cool. I can't wait till you see it. And then they go, oh yeah, I went and used the new self-service till. It's really cool. And you go, actually, that's amazing. I've done all this stuff in technology for the last 10 odd years, and you never said any of it's cool. You never really understood it or could see it, but they could actually have a tangible way of interacting with the technology. And that's one of the cool things about working in Tesco, actually getting to see and touch and feel and talk about and see in day-to-day life what you do.
Incredible. Rohit, you've now got the hardest job. You've now got to follow both of them. So
I'll try my best. When you set expectations straight, it's not going to be as amazing as the answer from these guys. A couple of things. First thing is the culture in the organization. That's probably my number one favorite. Putting aside engineering and all of the architecture, the culture is probably one of the best that I have encountered in my career. Devs are empowered, teams are empowered, I'm empowered. And that really results into an amazing place to work. And for me, that is key. the second part is, again, the scale. I'll just give you, scale is probably, is not a surprise. I'll give you an example of where it became, it took the awesomeness of that kind of, it was almost at a different level. It was last year. Last year, the world is transformed. Like the world we're in now is nothing like the world we were in March or Feb 2020. People's shopping habits have transformed drastically. And at Tesco, the journey that we have gone through over the whole of last year to kind of keep pace and keep ahead of those expectations that our customers have of us, and keep engineering and technology at the heart of how we respond to those expectations has been amazing. It has been, it's been like every day has been like no other, because nobody knows what is going to happen next. Not even the best politicians, not even the best philosophers, best economists in the world can predict where this is going to end, or how yet last year would end. So just keeping pace of that so that we do not slip up on the expectations that the country, that our customers have of us, and use engineering and technology to kind of satisfy those expectations and keep ahead of it when there was no template to follow. That's been pretty challenging and very special to be part of.
Amazing. Right, let's get 3 more questions in, one for each of you. Let's hope that I send them to the right people as we go along, but I'll do my best. So this one's for yourself, Nathan. So what networking stacks are you using in front of Kubernetes, and how have you guys managed to scale the traffic that you get in these? Get with these. Is a lot of the load handled by third-party CDNs?
So yeah, to deal with the scale of traffic, as you saw, the picture in my slides was from our CDN provider of 2,000 hits a second. You need to cache that at the edge of the CDN edges. So a sort of a common pattern, obviously, is to use Jamie's caveats earlier. Every stack is different. Every team does it slightly different. But say a typical stack that my team sees across engineering teams would be a CDN. So we have a CDN and a gateway for our API traffic. So for the identity API, goes through a different CDN. For our customer-facing traffic, it will go to a web CDN. So from that CDN, we'll then go to the origin, and the origin will normally be sitting in front of one of our cloud providers. So it'd be AWS or Azure. So it'll be sit then an ELB or an Azure load balancer. Underneath that would generally then be either an Nginx-based ingress controller into a Kubernetes cluster. And again, the cloud provider will go over the AZs or the data centers. Then it will go down to into its pods, will be then an Nginx based, be that an Azure app gateway, or build your own sort of Nginx to then go into your pods for an ingress controller. And then that will scale across, obviously Kubernetes will orchestrate the load across those into the pods. So that's a typical stack that we're seeing now for either customer-facing application using containers and Kubernetes, or an API microservice architecture.
Great. And then second one's for you, Jamie. Working from a product versus project basis, how do you find the business side of people have adapted to this change?
Yeah, thanks, Darren. That's a question that I think has come up a few times in the Q&A. So good question. I think lots of people have that on their mind. So I think for me, the most important thing here is, as I said in my answer in the chat, is it's all about having the right KPIs and the right objectives in place. I think if you get to a place where everyone, business and technology together, agree that what is it that we're going after and the KPIs and the ways that we're going to measure that, then it makes the transition to a product-driven mindset much, much easier. I think you tend to get the friction where if teams are misaligned on what is it that we're trying to achieve, then obviously you're never going to get to a place where you can agree on how it is that we're going to go about achieving it. So I think that's been our number one learning, really, that if you can take the business team with you on the journey to defining what those KPIs are, what are the things that really matter to our customers, and then take them through the journey of understanding what do we think the benefits are of a product-driven approach, then as they start to see those KPIs moving in the right direction and they start to see the benefits and the returns from a real tangible customer perspective, they'll begin to understand, why that approach works for us and why we do it the way we do. But yeah, having clear KPIs that everyone agrees with is absolutely my number one tip for that.
Cool, fine. So we've actually reached time. Sorry, Rohit, you don't get a question on your side, but what I have done is I've taken all of the questions out of the Q&A. So what I will do is work with the marketing team. We've got a hand job just to redistribute these, make sure we're answered in one way or another. Really want to thank the team here that have attended events and all the attendees as well. I hope everyone's enjoyed it as much as I have.
Thank you.
Perfect.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thanks,
So
guys.
host and Darren, thank you.
All right, take care.
Everyone
Bye.
for attending.